This video is sponsored by Warhammer 40,000 Tacticus. This right here, this box, this is the greatest thing that Games Workshop has ever made. It has been discontinued for 10 years and I have the fondest memories playing this game back when I was a kiddo. This is Space Hulk. This box is how most people got into Warhammer 40k back in the day. There was no Warhammer community, there was no animations, there were no apps, there were no video games, there was no merch. It was just this box, and I have one, and I'm gonna paint it. This box is perfection. From the inspirational artwork on the front to the purple and red sprues, it's dripping with polish. This is Space Hulk 4th edition, the magnum opus of 40k board games. Not that there's much competition. Do you guys remember Gangs of Gamorra? I don't. Games Workshop's most recent board games have all been RPG adventures like Blackstone Fortress and Curse City, but they don't hold a candle to Space Hulk. The Gene Stealers come on purple sprues, so you don't even need to paint them and have the game look good, but no self-respecting wargamer would ever leave models unpainted. And in terms of quality, these are extraordinary and very unique in the Games Workshop catalog. Most of these models are in two pieces, needing just a little bit of cleaning and sanding of mold lines to get them perfect. They aren't like regular 40k models, which need bases. Instead, they all stand on some spaceship stuff, and I sanded the bottoms flat so they sit perfectly on the cardboard tiles. And speaking of tiles, Warhammer 40,000 Tacticus is on hex tiles. Have you ever wanted to play Warhammer on the go in the palm of your hand? Well, then check out Warhammer 40,000 Tacticus, the definitive tactical mobile game set in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. Collect, upgrade, and engage in explosive head-to-head battles with over 60 characters from over 16 different factions. I love seeing the characters and units I love from Black Templar, Death Guard, Orcs, Nids, and more available and ready for battle. Whether you love playing through thematic PvE campaigns or gearing up to go head-to-head against friends or people from all over the world in epic PvP battles, Tacticus is here to give you everything you need. Join a guild and team up to face off against epic raid bosses, compete to see who can do the most damage, and reap the rewards of victory. There are new events constantly featuring new characters and units, so join now to not miss out. Over 3.5 million players have already signed up to play the definitive grimdark mobile game, so join in and become part of the growing community taking on the world of Warhammer 40,000 Tacticus. Click the link in the description to join today. I got the first sprue 100% picked clean. I got 9 Gene Stealers and a couple Adore frames. Sprue 1 of 5 done, and I almost don't want to throw this sucker out because this purple sprue is a piece of wargaming history. But now, looking at what I got in front of me, I'm thinking about what I want to do. I have a lot of experience tackling bigger projects, and I feel like I always make those projects a little harder on myself, or at least less fun, in the hopes of efficiency. My brain is kind of telling me, build every single thing. That is the most efficient you can be, and then prime, and then base coat, and then highlight, and then shade, and then varnish. But that tends to make a project boring. I have 35 miniatures to get through, and I want to do a really good job on them. Right now, I really want to paint. So I think I'm just gonna go ahead and paint these suckers. As pretty as the purple plastic is, I covered it all up with black primer. The Games Workshop painted minis are very good, mostly black bodies with Gene Stealer purple skin. I like this scheme a lot, but I think I want to change it up for my copy. I sprayed a dark blue from above and a dark purple from below. Then I turned the PSI almost all the way down on my airbrush and splattered the minis with thinned down blue. This will get darker as it dries and leave me with the beginnings of a texture. Then I dry brushed this blue all over the models. With my carapace base coated, it's time to base coat the skin. I started by spraying a dark beige red over their squishy bits and then sprayed on some tan, not quite covering up all of the red beige completely. Then I put some Reikland Flesh Shade over the skin and Nuln Oil over the armor. Most models benefit from a wash, and the Space Hulk minis take wash exceptionally well. Now my Gene Stealers are looking healthy. I want to make their skin look more ugly and alien, so I glazed on some magenta. I did a little bit of highlighting using my tan and red beige paint, but I was finding it really tricky. I think Gene Stealers are one of those models that are hard to paint. I did some highlights on the armor, and because of how the armor is shaped with big round details, I was struggling to get the highlights to stack on top of each other in a convincing way. It was looking okay, but the armor isn't matching the flesh very well. I tried glazing on some blue ink to try to smooth my blends, and this helped a little, but the coldness of the armor is clashing too much with the warmth of the flesh, making it look like aliens wearing a spacesuit instead of monsters, so I decided to scrap it all and try again. I prepared some blues on my palette, and this time I sponged it on. The sponging will naturally hit the highest points and miss the recesses. I started with the dark blue and then added more and more blue until I was sponging just a little bit of light blue. This gives the armor a much more rough texture and looks more natural. Then I glazed a transparent magenta ink over this to bring some warmth into their armor, hitting all the joints and the little splits in their armor. I also glazed this onto their skin to bring all the elements together. I did a last little dry brushing of light blue on their armor and then painted the little rough patch on their nose, giving it a little bit of sponging to match the armor. I painted the eyes, doing a dot of black and a little dot of white, and now my Steelers are looking genie. It's time for their I can't believe they're not bases. I painted all the Space Hulk bits with a dark gray, putting this on the door standees as well. I want to make them look just like the cardboard tiles. I dry brushed a mid-tone gray over this and did some washing with Army Painter Speed Paint, Noble Skin, and Occultist Cloak, which were a warm dark gray and a cold dark gray. I slobbered these colors over each base and door stand 50-50, and once that was dry, I did another layer of dry brushing, doing a final dry brushing of a light gray, but not too light. I don't want the floors to end up brighter than my models. I made some hazard stripe stencils out of playing cards for the door standees. This worked really well. I found spraying really close to the model gave me the best results with the least fuzzy overspray. I want my copy of Space Hulk to be perfect, so even the door frames get special painting treatment. To make the yellow look more intense, I glazed on some Fugue and orange, giving each stripe a gradient. Now the Space Hulk bits are painted, I have to do all the little special details that are on the Gene Stealers. Many of them have Terminator helmets in their hands, and one of them is standing on a whole dead guy. I base coated these with dark red, and then layered on highlights up through pure red, and then finishing off with an orange. This is a different style of painting than I did on the Steelers, and it's working really well because there should be a separation in appearance. Smooth, perfect, clean armor with gruesome, ugly monsters surrounding them. This fella perched on a bit of machinery has a Space Marine's head torn off its body and is swinging it around by the wires of his black carapace. This fun little fella is guarding his collection of skulls. These must be from the first battle for the Space Hulk Sin of Damnation, where the entire Blood Angels chapter entered the Hulk and only 50 survived. The lore of Space Hulk 4th edition is that the Hulk has returned from the warp, and the Blood Angels are ready for round 2. And if you want to go a few rounds in a Space Hulk, then our Patreon is for you. Ever wanted to fight your battles in the labyrinthine hallways of a starship? Moving your models in tight formation through a maze of corridors, bulkheads, and junctions where retreat is impossible and danger is around every corner? Well, the Eons of Battle Starship Interior is here to make your dreams a reality. For the month of July, subscribers to our Patreon will receive the Starship Interior, a set of claustrophobic, dynamic, and modular hallways that are scaled to perfectly suit wargaming miniatures and give you a new way to play. These models are nearly finished, so I gave them a satin varnish and have a few finishing touches to perfect them. I put some dirty down rust all over the metal bits. This stuff looks just like rust once it's dried, and then I dry brush on some gunmetal silver over the metal bits. I wanted to do this after the varnish because varnish changes the look of these paints, and I want them to look their best while having my paint jobs perfectly protected. And now for the finishing touch, a little bit of blood. I dripped my paintbrush into my blood for the blood god and then used a toothpick to bend and flick the bristles, throwing the paint onto the bases. Then I slipped the cardboard doors into the standees, which look perfect. One legendary Space Hulk purple sprue complete, 9 Steelers, 6 doors. Oh, it's a dream coming true. It's so cool. I did have a copy of Space Hulk in high school. I never got around to painting many of the miniatures, and actually I kit bashed and converted them into my 40k armies at the time once we were done playing with Space Hulk, but I do have one Steeler left over from those days, and I would say my new Gene Stealers are a little bit of an improvement. It is so cool to see Space Hulk coming to life in front of me, and the next sprue has the mighty Broodlord in it. The Broodlord is the lord of the Gene Stealers. Regular Stealers basically always kill a Terminator in one punch, but the Broodlord, you might as well not even roll it. The Space Hulk Broodlord is my favorite Broodlord, but there's actually quite a few of this model. There is the Gene Stealer Cult Broodlord, who has some crazy retro spines, and the Tyranid Broodlord, who's got a going in for a big ol' hug pose. And the Broodlord we're all trying to forget about, the Old Metal Broodlord. Now that I have 9 Steelers under my belt, I can breeze through the Broodlord as I have perfected my scheme. Some dark blue from the top and some dark purple from below, a little spitting of blue, and then painting the flesh. I found using a paper towel helped me get these colors into the hard to spray parts. Then a little highlight of light beige and then the washes. Then I did some highlighting on the skin, and I found dry brushing worked much better on the highlights than I did in my first batch. Then I went for the sponging. I did 4 layers of sponging, starting with a dark blue and adding more and more blue, and sponged less and less until I had a nice gradient on the alien skin. And I switched from light blue paint, which had white in it, to a turquoise, so my colors stay nice and saturated. Then, for my favorite part of just about every model, I glazed on magenta. I put this sparingly into his pale skin and then splashed it into the recesses of his carapace. I finished off using a little more Reikland Flesh shade to get his skin perfect, and I painted his teeth with the tan color, doing a few final glazes on his big ol' head. He is the Broodlord after all. It's worth spending a little extra time on him to make him look his best. After putting some gray paint on the base and doing a little dry brushing and washing, it was time for his mountain of skulls. I base coated the bones with the brown paint and then gave them a wash of Agrax Earthshade. Then I mixed in some tan paint into my brown and started dry brushing, which perfectly highlighted all the little faces. That is a ton of dead Space Marines. Once I was happy with my skulls, I picked out all the Terminator heads, giving them a base coat of dark red and then layering up brighter and brighter red until I was at pure red. And I gave the eye lenses a base coat of green and a highlight of neon green. Each chapter of Space Marines has about 100 suits of Terminator armor, and this Broodlord is holding 7 of them. After a varnish, I threw on some dirty down rusty rust, dry brushed a gunmetal, and did some good old-fashioned blood splatter. And boom, just like that, another Space Hulk sprue complete. 4 more Gene Stealers, the mighty Broodlord, and 8 doors are now complete, and I've got about 30% of the box done. Space Hulk, the greatest board game / miniature war game ever made. And what makes it the best? Because there's a lot of games out there that toe the line between board game and tabletop war game. What I think Space Hulk does so phenomenally well is it actually provides a good tabletop war game experience in the vein of a board game. Because board games are usually smaller, they take less time, they're much, much simpler, and none of those words fit anything to do with Warhammer 40,000. But Space Hulk is different. The rules for Space Hulk are small and tight. The miniatures are beautiful and gorgeous, but still kind of feel like board game miniatures. It was the best product Games Workshop ever made, and it's been discontinued for 10 years, but it's so much fun to relive those experiences right now. And speaking of right now, the Gene Stealers are now done, so it's time to work on the Blood Angels. And I'm gonna paint this Blood Angel, but he's dead. Speaking of what makes Space Hulk feel so premium and so polished that even the tokens are some of the coolest minis Games Workshop has ever made. A dead captain of the Blood Angels First Company. I primed the mini with a dark red and then airbrushed a light red from above to give me my simple values. Then I picked out all the parts that will be gold or paper with brown. After that, I dry brushed all the brown parts with an earth brown and did a final dry brushing of yellow. These parts will get a dusting of metallic paint later, but right now I'm just preparing. And speaking of preparing, I prepared a wash. This is 50/50 Carbog Crimson and Null Oil, thinned down with Lamian Medium. Once that was dry, my recesses were looking nice and dark, and I re-hit my gold parts with some yellow dry brushing. And then I broke out my brightest red and started highlighting, hitting all the most raised parts of his armor. It's not really obvious how this Space Marine died. He kinda looks like he was just having a little siesta in his chair and then expired. Once my red highlights were applied, I glazed a little bit of black paint into his recesses to make the contrast more intense between the darkest and lightest parts of his armor. Then I painted his Crux Terminatus, the symbol of the First Company, and it's rumored that held within each of these sigils is a small piece of the Emperor's own armor, granting that suit the power of the Emperor of Mankind. Probably not though. There are millions of suits of Terminator armor, and the Emperor's armor was big, but not that big. After a Null Oil wash, I highlighted up the Crux using lighter and lighter shades of gray until I did a few tiny highlights of white. Now onto his little skull head and purity seals. I glazed tan mixed with brown over top of these areas, highlighting them again and again using a stippling texture for his noggin and long scratchy lines for the purity seals. Highlighting them again and again with lighter shades of tan until these areas were practically glowing. I did a final glaze of watery brown to help smooth out my transitions and did a final pass of white paint, putting on just a little. For the lenses of his Terminator helmet, I base coated it in a green and then highlighted it up to a neon green, and did a tiny drop of yellow right in the middle. Now for his robes. The Games Workshop box art says that these should be a tan like the purity seals, but I think a blue-gray would look much more striking next to the red armor. I highlighted a mix of white into my blue-gray and painted this on until his robes were gleaming. I put a little bit of poster putty behind his chair so my fingers wouldn't rub off paint while I was handling this sucker. Usually I would hold a mini by its base, but I don't have one here. I varnished this guy with a satin varnish along with another token that comes in the box, the Blood Angel's Artifact, a blood chalice from the age of the Horus Heresy. I dry brushed all the brown and yellow bits with a gold paint, which will shine their brightest over the satin varnish, and I gave this deceased Space Marine a splash of blood for the Blood God. I picked out all the blood drops on the chalice with this too so that they were super vibrant and glossy. Now it's just a chalice, but a Blood Angel's chalice should always be filled with blood. I poured a little UV cure resin into the cup and then cured it with my UV lamp, and then I put some more blood for the Blood God on top, and it looks perfect. A lovely pair of game tokens. I got 2 of the tokens finished for Space Hulk, and oh, these are tokens. I play a ton of board games, and best case scenario, a token is a little printed piece of cardboard. These are gorgeous, and it might seem silly to spend so much time perfecting tokens that are each used in one singular mission, But it was worthwhile because I got a lot of practice in on how I'm going to paint the members of the Red Sprue, the heroes of the first company. And in the Space Hulk mission book, there is a really clever passage about these Space Marine heroes. Amongst the many heroes of the battle, a dozen individuals were marked out for special praise by Captain Raphael, the overall commander of the first company who entered the Sin of Damnation Space Hulk. On a day where every tale was heroic, these warriors fought especially bravely and showed the greatest qualities of a Blood Angel's Terminator. All were awarded honors for their deeds, some of them sacrificing their lives for the success of the mission. I really like that last line where it leaves it very open-ended who died, because if anyone's played Space Hulk before, all of these suckers die constantly, because Space Hulk is an exceptionally brutal war game, and that makes me really excited to get these Blood Angels all painted up. One of the things that really strikes me about Space Hulk the board game is the level of polish. Every one of the 12 Space Marines, from the grunts to the heroes, has a name and backstory, and makes playing the game feel like entering the world of Warhammer. That rando who just rolled a 1 isn't just a gaming piece, that was Brother Valencio, Brother Goriel, Brother Zale, maybe even Sergeant Lorenzo, one of the oldest and fiercest warriors in the 40,000 year history of 40k. Printed in glorious red plastic, each of these Marines is a unique sculpt never seen before or since in Warhammer, which is a shame. Games Workshop has been doing some made-to-order stuff. If they won't re-release Space Hulk, they could at least sell the sprues to Blood Angel players. And one thing that even Games Workshop couldn't be bothered to do on their minis is drill the gun barrels. I want the perfect copy of Space Hulk, so I have to rectify this. Drilling and then reaming the holes bigger with my Dremel tool bit. The assault cannon was particularly tricky to do, but it just doesn't look right with 6 barrels with no holes in them. And on Sergeant Gideon, his little trinket hanging from his power cable kept breaking off no matter how much glue I put on it. It seems like this has always been a flaw with these models. Looking at the Games Workshop official model, that one also has this bit broken off. I sanded the bottoms perfectly and then blasted them with some black primer, painting these guys up exactly like I did the Dead Space Marine token. But these aren't just Terminators, they are the named characters, and they all have a little something special about them. First up, Brother Dino. He has a black Power Fist fingers and a little loincloth. I base coated his fingers black and then highlighted them using a dark gray up to a mid-tone gray. I don't want to go too bright with these highlights, just enough so that you can see his little fingers. And for his robes, I used the same blue-gray I did for the Dead Space Marine. Now to his Holy Stormbolter. I base coated all the metal gray, giving it a little highlight, and I put some gold onto the bullets. After a coat of Nuln Oil, old Dino is ready for action. On to Brother Noctis. He has white details on his shoulder and knee, and a targeting sight on his Power Fist. I painted on the white and did a line of black running through the center. This took a lot of layers to cover all the red, but it was worth it. Look how much Noctis shines. I painted his Power Fist black. Usually the sight on the fist is accompanied by a Cyclone missile launcher, but apparently Brother Noctis left his at home. Maybe the hallways of the Space Hulk are too tight for such a bulky piece of war gear. Now he's done, and it's time for Brother Scipio. Scipio has a black shoulder pad, black Power Fist, and is currently making his own escape hole through the floor. After a black base coat, I highlighted with a dark gray, glazing this over the black. It's subtle, but it makes these black details a lot more dynamic. Now on to Brother Omnio. For Omnio, a panel has opened up on his Power Fist, revealing a small screen. Who knew there was a little computer in Power Fists? I painted around the screen with black, and then I painted the screen itself white, doing some white edge highlights. Then I airbrushed some green over this, doing some object source lighting, painting a tiny little grid of yellow lines on the circle and a few dots of red. Now on to Brother Goriel. He doesn't have any special armor, but instead is holding up half of a Gene Stealer. I painted his victim using all the same colors I did for my Space Hulk Gene Stealers. Although it does happen that a Space Marine can defeat a Gene Stealer in close combat, it's not very likely. Gene Stealers roll 3 dice looking for high rolls, and Space Marines only roll 1, so the odds are not in their favor. After Goriel, it's time for Brother Chad Valencio, who has white stripes on his right shoulder, a little wing on his Holy Bolter, and the Chain Fist. After getting the white stripe painted, I did up his little wings. It's cute that his stubby little bolt gun has cherub wings. And then it was time for his Chain Fist. I base coated it with black and then did some yellow stripes, fixing any mistakes with more black paint, and then I used some Fugan Orange to add in some shading. The Chain Fist's ability in Space Hulk is it can automatically cut open doors without needing to roll, but it has no extra power against Gene Stealers. Next up, the trigger-happy Brother Zale. He carries the Heavy Flamer, which is the most powerful gun in the game. I base coated his right shoulder pad black, and then did the same on the body of his flamethrower, putting gray over the gun bits and then giving everything a wash of Nuln Oil, and then putting some Black Templar contrast paint over the bottom half of the weapon to create a gradient. The flamethrower kills any Gene Stealers on a tile on a 2+, but it can only be shot 6 times, and after that, Zale is completely useless. Now onto Brother Zale's BFF, Brother Leon. Leon carries the assault cannon and has funny little plates on his shoulders. The bottom half of these plates are painted black, and similarly half his shoulder pad is black. He also has a black power fist. Brother Leon might be getting close to Death Company black armor. For his assault cannon, which is typically mounted on Space Marine tanks, but Terminators hold them with one hand, I base coated it in gray paint, picked out the bullets with gold paint, and then gave it all a wash with thinned down Black Templar contrast paint, doing a few coats to add some variety to the metal. Leon is probably the Space Marine you want most on your team. I painted the best, now it's time for the worst. Poor Brother Claudio and his twin lightning claws. I base coated these with gray, and as if Games Workshop knows this guy sucks in game, they gave him tons of heavy battle damage on his armor. Although I love lightning claws, they only make him a little bit better than a regular Terminator in melee, and still not nearly as good as a Genestealer. With no gun, he's entering the Hulk as good as dead. Now onto Sergeant Lorenzo. With his flowing, fashionable cape, helmetless head, and crackling power sword, he is a sight to behold. I painted the inside of his cape with a dark blue-gray, making a gradient up to light gray. And for the outside of the cape, I painted it with black, with subtle highlights of dark gray. Then for his face, and if I had to name one flaw of Space Hulk minis, the faces of the captains are pretty soft in detail. I had to make up a lot of what was going on with the face, giving him creases in his brow and crazy cheekbones. And a mane of gray hair. Now onto his sword. I base coated it black with a light blue line running up the shaft, and at the top, I painted some squiggly lines to represent the crackling energy of the sword, doing a smaller line of white and doing some more white crackles. Sergeant Lorenzo is always a good model to have. He has a Stormbolter, is slightly better in close combat, and lets you reroll your command points, which is the real reason you want him. Now for Sergeant Gideon. He has black shoulder pads and is equipped with the Thunder Hammer and Storm Shield. After base coating the shoulder pads black and painting the little stripe on his little shoulder shield, I painted his Thunder Hammer with light gray on the shaft and dark gray on the business end. Then I threw on a Null Oil wash and painted his robes with my blue-gray color. His face was even harder to paint than Lorenzo's. He's mostly covered up with a respirator, you can just barely see his eyes. And he must be younger than Lorenzo, as his hair hasn't gone gray yet. Although he lacks a gun, the Storm Shield does keep him slightly safer from Genestealers. Slightly. 11 Blood Angels Space Hulk Terminators complete. That took a long time, and I'm not technically done yet. I still need to do the bases, and then varnish them, and then do the metallics, but even though I've got all 11 Terminators finished, there is one more models in the Space Marines arsenal, and that is the Librarian Lexicanum, the most powerful Space Marine unit in all of Space Hulk. Nearly indestructible, really good in close combat for a Space Marine, and able to cast psychic powers every single turn. This guy only sees play in a couple of missions, but is probably the coolest model in all of Space Hulk. Lexicanum Calistarius, the Battle Psyker. I love this model. My original copy I used to try and paint a model using only the airbrush, and the results were okay, but I'm excited to try it again. Not only airbrushing again, painting this model again. I sprayed a light blue from above and started trying to do some shading, but I was having trouble with my blue paint. Instead, I decided to throw a blue wash over the model to darken it. After the wash, I applied some highlights, going up to a green-blue turquoise color that felt suitably magical. Then I painted his shoulder pads red, starting with a dark red and highlighting up to a light red. I also put these colors onto his Stormbolter and loincloth. I base coated all the purity seals and gold things with brown paint, and then gave them the same red-black wash I did on all my Terminators. To highlight the purity seals, I mixed in a tan paint, doing lots of layers of scratchy highlights until I got all the way to white paint. And I painted a Stormbolter and the shaft of his legendary Force Axe with gray, giving these a wash of thinned down Black Templar contrast paint. For his Force Axe, I base coated it in black and then edge highlighted it with blue, and I painted on some tiny little lightning bolts, doing these in blue and then in white to make the crackling energy effect. Then I painted the Psychic runes with orange paint, putting this on the Force tubes that all Psychers have, giving these areas a highlight of yellow and a shade of red. Then for his face, I gave him a dull complexion. Those who use the powers of the warp tend to have a sickly look. Only Space Marines can be Psychers for any great length of time without their power either killing them or corrupting them. Lexicanum is a beast in the game. He can't lose in close combat, he casts psychic powers, and unlike Sergeant Gideon, actually remembered to bring his Stormbolter. Now I can give all my Marines a blasting of satin varnish and do the finishing touches, dry brushing all the brown bits with gold paint and silver paint over the weapons, and painting the bases exactly like I did the Genestealers, putting on silver paint and then a little bit of dirty down. With 12 Space Marine Terminators and 22 Genestealers, I have painted nearly every single piece of plastic that comes in the Space Hulk box. It's taken a long time, but it's so awesome. Like, A perfect copy of Space Hulk is gonna be the pride and jewel of my Warhammer collection, right up there next to my Reaver Titan. They're gonna be displayed in a place of honor in my living room. And the only thing left to do is to paint arguably one of the coolest pieces of plastic in the box, the Cyber Altered Task Unit, also known as the Cat. The Cat unit has taken on a life of its own in 40K, becoming quite the meme. I primed it black and then base coated this tiny little thing with gray, doing a zenithal of light gray and a wash of thinned down Black Templar contrast paint. Then I painted his little skull using brown paint and a highlighting with tan. Hopefully this poor fella is thoroughly lobotomized so that he doesn't know he's a cat. I dry brushed his body with gray and then painted his tracks and tail with brown. After a Null Oil wash, he was looking pretty for a kitty, and I dry brushed silver over his metal body, and picked out his robo eyes with green to match the Space Marines. The very last piece of plastic from the legendary Space Hulk box finished. It's done. One perfect, beautiful, finished copy of Space Hulk painted as good as the box art. I wonder how many of those exist. Like, Space Hulk's been discontinued for 10 years, but it's still really popular. Every time I go to Adepticon, I see multiple giant tables of people playing Space Hulk, and I have one. It's so cool. I've got Brother Zale, Brother Leon, Brother Claudio. Nobody likes Brother Claudio. Goddamn Dino, Brother Dino. He might be my favorite of all of the Blood Angels. Sergeant Gideon, Sergeant Lorenzo, a whole big gaggle of Gene Stealers. Games Workshop loves to put Gene Stealers into everything. I have painted so many Gene Stealers, but man, Space Hulk is just the coolest thing. It is a beautiful, epic board game, incredibly fun to play. I think by now I have played all of the missions, and now I gotta play them all again because I actually have a painted set of Space Hulk. And as cool as it is, with all of the beautiful miniatures and the cardboard terrain, which is, it's fine, it's nice, I think I can do a little better. If you guys want a little sneak peek of what's happening next week, this is 25 liters of resin that has been turned into the ultimate board of Space Hulk terrain. It's fun to play on the cardboard, but we're gonna play it full scale. All of this terrain is gonna be available on our Patreon for the month of July, and if you guys wanna play Space Hulk, but the game's been discontinued for 10 years, you can get the models, and you can find the rules online, and if you want the board, you can find it on our Patreon. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and leave it in the comments which of the Blood Angels is your favorite. For me, it's gotta be Dino. And a big thanks to Warhammer 40,000 Tacticus for sponsoring this build. Don't forget to follow the link in the description below and download Warhammer 40,000 Tacticus for free.